Welcome to Sakshi TV's special immigration show with attorney Ms. Prashanthi Reddy from the Law Offices of Prashanthi Reddy PLLC. Welcome to the show, Ms. Reddy.
Thank you, Torni.
So, Ms. Prashanthi Reddy has had over 20 years of experience in the immigration area, and to contact further for any kind of information, please log on to the reddyesq.com site. So, welcome again to the show, Ms. Reddy. And do we have any latest immigration updates before we go into the questions format of the show?
No updates. Let's just go directly into the planned format.
So today we're talking about the H1B essential elements. So what and the H1B FAQs, of course. So what do you think are the essential elements for H1B?
So yeah, Torni, I thought we'll do once again revert back to the H1B topic, simply because now that registrations are done, people have taken a break and now they've actually started filing their H1s, and companies have started filing the LCA process, etc. So I thought it would be a good time to talk about what documents are needed to file a H1 and what are the basic elements and things to keep in mind when you file the H1. Whether you are a company or you are the beneficiary, it's important to know the basic ABCs of the H1B process. So we could, and then if we have time, we can follow up with some frequently asked questions. So I guess the first element is what is a H1. And a H1B is a non-immigrant classification based on which a person who is working in a specialty occupation, that is an occupation that requires the minimum of a bachelor's degree in a specific field, is able to petition with the USCIS, and once that H1B, the employer petitions, and once the H1B is approved, then the beneficiary can start working in that specialty occupation, and this most importantly gives the beneficiary the ability to work. So it's a work visa, unlike the F1, which is a student visa, doesn't in all circumstances allow you to work. The B1, B2 is a visitor's visa. So this is specifically a work visa, but not all jobs qualify. It has to be a specialty occupation job to qualify. So then the next question, I guess, would be what is a specialty occupation? Which jobs qualify for the H1, right? So a specialty occupation basically requires, has to require the theoretical and practical application of a body of very specialized knowledge, along with at least a bachelor's degree or its equivalent. So there has to be specialized knowledge, and there has to be a requirement of a bachelor's degree in a specific field. Just to name some, architecture, engineering, mathematics, medicine, law, education, all these could be specialty occupations. So the first thing is that the position should require specialized knowledge. The position should require a bachelor's degree in a specific field, not a bachelor's degree in arts, that is not specific, but a bachelor's degree in, say, electrical engineering. That is specific enough. So, and also the third part is that the beneficiary should actually have that degree. That means must be qualified. So if it's an electrical engineering position, the beneficiary cannot have a chemical engineering degree, then they won't qualify. They have to have an electrical engineering degree. So that is, in a nutshell, what specialty occupation is. Torni?
Right. So, Ms. Reddy, moving on to our next question, what do you think is the, is there an annual limit on the number of H1B aliens?
Right, yes, there is. So, while there is no limit on filing transfers and extensions, there is a limit in new H1s. So if you've never been on a H1 and you're filing a change of status, say from an F1 to a H1 or an L1 to a H1, or if you're out of the country and filing H1 for the first time, then there is a limit on those kind of H1s. And the limit is 65,000 for bachelor's bachelor's degree holders, and there's a separate limit, a cap for master's degree holders, which is 20,000. So total number of H1s that are allowed to be filed every year are about 85,000.
Right.
But numerous H1s are filed every year, much more than the limit, 3 times, 4 times. For example, the last year, about 300,000 plus applications got filed. This year, 400,000 plus applications got filed. So you can see it's not even 1/4, 1/5. The number gets picked out of the total number that's filed. So you can see what the actual demand is for the H1B numbers. And there's been a lot of advocacy on increasing those H1B numbers, but so far there has been no success in that front. But there are some H1Bs, some H's that are not subject to the cap, and those are H's that are filed by exempt organizations, so organizations that are non-profit, governmental organizations, or educational institutes, so educational institute, higher secondary institutions, like, so if you're working for a college as a professor, then you would not be counted towards the cap. Or if you're a non-profit hospital and you are associated with an educational institute, for example, if you're a CUNY hospital, say, and you're educated with the medical college as well, then it won't be considered to be H1B cap subject. So, but that is not really sufficient, because that's very few in number. The cap exempt H1s are very few in number when compared to the cap subject H1Bs.
Right. So since we're already talking, we're talking about the H1B essential elements. So while we're talking about the elements, let's also talk about the procedure. So how does one apply for an H1B visa?
Right. So in order to apply for a H1B visa, first, what needs to be done is the job needs to be decided. So the employer has to tell us what the job is, and the job duties need to be properly defined. This is all the groundwork that you do first. Then you have to make sure that, whatever job is being given and whatever the duties are, that the beneficiary actually has that degree. Say, for example, it's a software engineer job. We have to make sure we get proper duties from the company. We can't just say design, develop software. That's not enough. You have to explain what the duties entail, so that USCIS or the officer that's reviewing the case can make a decision as to whether, they're complex, the duties are complex enough to require a bachelor's degree in computer science. So the duties have to be flushed out. Then we have to make sure the beneficiary has a computer science degree or an IT related degree. Could be information systems, computer science, or some, related technology degree. So that's the third thing that you have to kind of look at. And then after those things are decided, you have to actually also, of course, make sure that the employer has a job for the person. So you can't just file based on speculative employment. The employer cannot say, oh, I'm going to file this H1, and once it gets approved, then I'm going to look for a job for this person. No. You have to be able to talk to the employer and make sure that they have enough work for that particular beneficiary. Say software engineer, if they're a consulting company, then you have to get a PO, make sure they have a purchase order to show that they have enough work to work at the end client. If they're working in-house, then you have to make sure you're able to document what, whether it's a contract that they're working on for another company but working in-house, or they're working on a particular product. You have to document that product information and the ownership of the product, because they are USCIS is very suspicious about whether the job actually exists or not, because there have been a lot of cases of speculative employment. So that's another issue to look into. So that's another piece of document that you need to keep aside. In addition to the LCA, making sure the duties are correct, making sure the degree is related, and then making sure that there's a job. After you do all this, you have to then file the labor condition application. Labor condition application is something that's not filed with immigration, with the USCIS, but it's filed with the Labor Department. And it's usually a form, a 4 or 5 page form, which attests to the job. The Labor Department code is put on that job so that they can identify the job easily. The work site is on the job. If there are 2 different work sites, then that's put on as well. And of course the job title, and the signator, the contact person, and then that particular, and the wage, most importantly, the prevailing wage is on the job, and the offered wage is also on the LCA. Right. So that LCA, before it is filed, has to be posted, where the company's other employees can look at it. So it has to be posted on either the company website as well as physically in the office for 10 days at least, 10 business days. So while it is being posted, the LCA can be filed. It's filed with the Labor Department, as I said. And it takes about 5 to 7 business days for the Labor Department to come back with the approved LCA. And once they do that, then you go ahead and include the LCA in the package, and then you have to fill out the I-129 forms. Now there's I-129, and there's I-129H supplement, and there is an I-129DC form. So all 3 forms have to be filled out. And there's varying information on all 3 different types of forms. The DC form has a lot of information on the employer, what kind of employer, how much fee would be required, how many number of employees that employer has, how many are on H1, whether they're H1B dependent or not, that's one of the questions. And whether it's cap exempt or cap subject. The I-129 form basically has information about the beneficiary, the company, and what action we're asking for. Are we asking for an extension? Are we asking for a new H1, which we would in these, cap cases, with reference to these cap cases. So there's a lot of information, and any typo can be fatal. So it's important to go through the form very carefully and make sure that whatever is on the LCA mirrors what's on the form as well, in relation to the wages, dates of employment, the job title, etc., the SOC code. So all that, it has to be the same. Right. So once you prepare the I-129 forms, you attach the LCA, you have to then also attach the degree copy and the transcripts, because we have to make sure that, the person is qualified for the job. So we attach that. If they have a foreign degree, we also get an evaluation done of the degree to show that it's equivalent to a US bachelor's degree. So we get a educational credential evaluation done from a third party, and we attach that as well. We also prepare a petitioner letter, and the petitioner letter will have, a detailed job description and how about the company and what type of business the company does, and that all the duties are mentioned, the job title, etc. So all that is flushed out in the petitioner letter. In addition to that, we of course include the passport copy, and if there is additional information needed, for example, if it's a change of status, then USCIS wants to see status information about the beneficiary. So they want to make sure the person is in status first in order to be able to file a change of status. Otherwise, the change of status portion of the H1 will get denied, and the H1 will get approved only for consular processing, which means they have to go out of the country and then come back on that H1. They can't file a change of status. So change of status information, if they're on an F1, is usually, all their I-20s, their CBIS records, their, of course, the I-94 copy, and a letter from the university saying that they're in good standing if they're still, going to school. Or if they're on OPT, then copy of the OPT approval, the EAD copy, employment authorization copy, to show that they are still, invalid EAD, or within the 60 days grace period, whatever might be the situation. So that is status documentation. Right. These are all the different little parts that go into the actual package, but there are different elements to even preparing the package depending on what what kind of H1 is being filed.
That's right. We were talking about essential elements of H1B and the H1B status, how to apply and all. So how long can an alien be on the H1B status?
So when you apply for the H1, you usually apply for, you can only apply for a maximum of 3 years. So you ask for 3 years, and then after that, after 3 years expire, before it expires, you're allowed to apply for an extension 6 months before expiry of status, and you can apply for an additional 3 years. So in total, you can be on a H1 for a total of 6 years. However, there are exceptions to this 6-year rule. For example, if you have an I-140 approved, then you can apply for an additional 3 years until you get a green card. So there's an unlimited number of times that you can apply for the H1. So you can keep on applying for extensions of 3 years at a time, provided your I-140 is approved. Also, if 365 days have passed since the filing of your labor, or 365 days have passed since the filing of your labor and I-140, whatever the case might be, you can get then an extension of 1 year on your H1. So that's another way to get further extensions. Also, if you have remained outside the country for some period of time, you can recapture that period outside the country. Say in the last 6 years you spent 1 month every year outside the country on vacation, so you can recapture that 6 months, and then that might give you enough time, to file a green card, or wait for your green card, or wait for your I-140, which you filed, or labor cert which you filed. So that's the AC-21 rule, which allows you to, get a H1 extended beyond 6 years. Also, another way is if you have spent your entire 6 years and then you leave the country and you stay outside for a period of 1 year, then you get a fresh period of another 6 years on H1, starting with 3 years and then extending to another 3 years. But when you're doing this, when you're filing for this, you will be counted towards the cap. So it'll be a cap subject H1B petition.
Right. Right. So, Ms. Reddy, do you have anything else to add on to our essential elements of H1B, or can we move to the H1B FAQs?
No, let's talk about a few more essential elements, because even if we don't get a chance to do the FAQs, we can do it next session.
Definitely.
So the other question I wanted to discuss is what happens if the alien circumstances change. So if something changes with, you filed the H1, it got approved, and now if something changes with the H1B beneficiary's work, what happens then? How, what to do? So this really depends on what kind of change there is. For example, if there's two types of changes: material change and a change that is not material. So Labor Department and USCIS says if it's a material change, then you have to file a H1B amendment. And recently there's been regulation stating that H1B amendment is required if there is a change in work location, and that work location is beyond the MSA, meaning beyond commuting distance of the previous location. So if you're moving to a different state, for example, far away, from California to New York, say, just to give an example, then you would have to file, if your work site is changed, then you have to file an amendment. Now, say the duties have changed, but the job title remains the same, then you would not have to do anything. You can just continue. If the salary has gone up, you may not, it's a gray area, but if it's not a significant increase, you may not have to file any kind of amendment for that change. In addition to that, if say the number of hours have changed, in that situation, especially if it's going from full-time to part-time, meaning it goes from 45 to say 10 hours a week, then you might have to file an amendment, because you'd have to because there's been a significant change in the number of hours, and you might have to file it as a part-time H1. So it really depends on what the change is. Another change is if your company gets merged with another company or sold to another company. This is in the case of M&As or mergers and acquisitions. In some instances, you may not have to do anything if all the liabilities also have been purchased by the new company. Then you may not have to do anything, but otherwise, in some other circumstances, you might have to actually file a transfer to the new employer. So it really depends on the circumstances as to what the change is.
Right. So, with that, Ms. Reddy, do we move on to the FAQs?
Yeah, I could
Permission.
think of a few more pointers because I just wanted to continue the essential elements. So another point is, does a H1B have to be working at all times? So
Right.
the H1B doesn't have to be working at all times, in the sense that there may be some exceptions where the employer-employee relationship, as long as the employer and employee relationship is maintained, even if they're not working in some situations, it might be okay. For example, they might be in a part-time position, so they don't have to be working all the time. It's not a full-time employment. Or they might be on vacation, whether it's paid or unpaid, so they don't have to be working there. It could be maternity leave, paternity leave, sick leave. But if the employer lays off the employee, then yes, their status could be affected and they may fall out of status, and then that beneficiary would be advised to quickly file a H1 transfer to another company. Now, also, whether travel is possible. When a H1B, can a H1 person on a H1 travel outside the country? We know they can, and they can come back as long as they have a valid visa. In order to get a visa approved, once you have filed your H1, once it gets approved, you can take that H1 approval, go to the consulate, and get your passport stamped with a H1B visa, and then you can, come back into the country. Last and but not the least, with reference to the essential elements, is can a H1B, can a person who's on a H1 file for a green card simultaneously? So this is yes, they can, because some non-immigrant petitions don't allow for dual intent, but a H1B allows for dual intent, which means
Right.
the H1B allows you to have the intent to immigrate permanently to the US, unlike
Yeah.
an F1 or a visitor's visa. So yes, you can immigrate permanently and you can start a process for the green card while you're on a H1.
Right. So, with that, Ms. Reddy, we come to the end of our session. We're so glad to have you on our show. Thank you for all the information that you give our viewers and have been giving for a while now. So, thank you, Ms. Reddy. We'll continue the session in our next session.
Thank you. Take care, Tony.
You too. Thank you. You're watching Sakshi Live. This is Thorni.